Well, greetings. Welcome once again to Pale Blooms and Beyond. Thank you for joining us today. Fergus Hambleton is a Canadian singer, songwriter, and multi-instrumentalist. In his career, he has recorded and performed in the folk, pop, and reggae genres. Fergus joined the rock band A Passing Fancy midstream in 1968, replacing previous member Brian Price on organ and vocals. While with the band, a few songs were recorded, including a single and a self-titled album, before calling it a day in 1969. Then came 3 solo albums of the soft rock folk variety in the early to mid-70s. The late 70s saw Fergus switch music genres when he began playing saxophone and guitar in the Jamaican community in Toronto. Doing session work led to his meeting of Jamaican musician Jo Jo Bennett. And the rest, they say, is history. Fergus and Jo Jo formed the popular reggae band, the Sattalites, enjoying 40 years together, including 6 albums and several singles until Jo Jo's passing in 2021. Fergus is continuing the legacy, fronting the band, still recording and playing live. And Mr. Hambleton still has time to record and release his own solo material. Well, welcome, Fergus.
Thanks very much, Greg. Nice intro. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take it
and all
back.
of it accurate.
Oh, well, good.
There
That's
you go.
like,
I've read many different things, but anyway, lovely.
good. I think that's one of the few times that I haven't been corrected. So thank you for that.
Nice to hear Brian Price's name mentioned too there, you know.
Yes. Well, take us back to the beginning. Where were you born?
Right here in Toronto, not too far from where I'm sitting right now, actually, downtown Toronto.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're similar to myself. I haven't really moved around a lot. Basically a Dallasite and, the suburbs of Dallas and that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Toronto has changed a lot. So I meet people and they're like, I'm the only person they've met who actually was born in Toronto kind of thing. We've
right.
It's quite a different city from the day I popped out.
Right. I get that. We get that here too, local, like homegrown people. We get so many people influx that move here, but to find somebody born here, it's kind of a rarity. Well, talk about some maybe some fond childhood memories growing up there.
Whoa. Well, being the age I am, which is 73, obviously I'm looking back on a different world if you're talking childhood memories, but I grew up in a Toronto that was very waspy. I don't know if that term means anything. White Anglo-Saxon Protestant, very British, very Scottish, actually, very Anglican, although of course there were Jewish people here and Roman Catholics and everything, but I mean, the society was very much like that. And so, for instance, on Sundays, you couldn't really do anything.
Okay.
Except spend time with your family and enjoy yourself and go to church, but you couldn't, it was pretty draconian for a while. So that got loosened up after a while. And then we moved to a little town called Oakville, just outside Toronto, when I was 8. And I landed in this kind of paradise of what an 8 to 12-year-old kid would love, which was basically I could run wild, and it was a small little town, and we were right by the lake, and blah, blah, blah. It was all good. And from Oakville, we got the radio stations from Toronto, the pop music, but we also got the pop music from Hamilton. And at night, I could get WBZ, I think that's Chicago, and WBZ I think was New York, but I could get one from Chicago, and I could get Detroit radio stations. So we could get a lot of radio stations. And my brother, who was 4 or 5 years older than me, he worked at a store called Lofquist, which was an old style it was a furniture store, and downstairs was the record department run by Mrs. Lofquist, and they had the booths. I mean, seriously, the records would come from Toronto on the Friday night, and Saturday morning we would go to Lofquist and go downstairs, and Mrs. Lofquist was there, and we'd get requests. And I know it sounds corny, but literally we'd all be like 5 of us with our heads stuck in a booth listening to the latest thing. I mean, when I was 10 years old, I bought what I consider to be Elvis's finest single ever, the double-sided Little Sister and His Latest Flame. Anyway, so I bought that record, and it was summer. I got on my bike and I cycled up to the pool where I knew my friends were. And I got off my bike and I came over, and everybody just gathered around to look at the new Elvis 45. That was, that was enough. Looking at the Elvis 45 was fantastic. So that atmosphere that I grew up, I got pneumonia playing around the lake, because we used to go down and jump ice flows for some ungodly reason, and I fell in. And if my brother hadn't been there, I wouldn't be here. Like, I'm dead serious. Like, we were like, the stupid things that we got up to back in those days, like gravel fights. Like, we used to have gravel fights. It's a wonder we weren't all maimed by the time we got to high school. But anyway, I went in and I got pneumonia. My brother Ian pulled me out and he said, "Go home." I had to run home about a mile, and I got pneumonia and I was sick. And my mother said it ruined me, because while I was sick, I listened to the radio, the AM radio from Toronto. And of course, during the day, it was the Housewives hit parade. So I heard Al Martino and Percy Faith and all these songs. And I just wanted to hear Elvis and blah, blah, blah. So about 3:00, they start playing that stuff, right? So it was full on. That was I got the Chipmunk song for Christmas when I was 8. And my next record was Pink Shoelaces by Dodie Stevens. And then my second record was Donna and La Bamba by Richie Valens. And my third record was Pink Shoelaces. I don't remember what the fourth was, but I had a paper route, and every week the pile of records in my room would get a little bit bigger, and my mom would come in and say, "How many records have you got there?" And I'd say, "The same as before, I think." And the pile would get a little bigger and a little bigger and a little bigger. This is where my paper route money went. So I still have all those records, though.
Is that right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I've got a lot of my 45s here still, and a lot of my LPs. Oh, there we go.
Yep.
I did see I saw on YouTube you did a thing where you showed your 45s. You did a little
and I just put this out because I thought I would show this to you today. I got this when I was signed to Capitol, okay, at the Christmas party. And he said, "Oh, some of the guys in the LA office knocked these off. Maybe you'd like one." And it's the Top of the Pops recordings, which nobody had heard it. This is 1972, right?
Yeah.
And another outtake from the Butcher cover. And then on the back of it, it's one of those pictures, the Robert Freeman pictures. So anyway, and there have been knockoffs made of this, but I know this is an original one from those days. So yeah.
Well, I bet that would fetch a pretty penny, I imagine.
I've looked online because people have said that to me, and the fact is there are so many knockoffs of it. Like, people have duplicated it, and there's the way when they mastered it, they would scratch a little number or an identifying thing in the thing. So there's one on there. So it probably could be verified that it's an original thing, but whatever. I don't really care. I like having it around. The Fab Four, Exactly. I still have my program from the Beatle concert here. So.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Yeah.
Well, it's not worth anything now because I tore out the picture of Paul McCartney to put in my locker at school.
Okay.
so the program's not worth anything now. Otherwise, it'd probably be worth a lot, especially if I had the ticket stubs,
Yeah. At that age, you didn't think about it. Maybe in the future it might be worth something. Yeah. Well, yeah,
we didn't think that any of that, like, in those days, you didn't even hear music from more than 6 months ago or 2 months ago, unless it was the end of the year and they did a wrap up of the year.
Right.
You didn't hear it.
Yeah.
All you heard was new songs all the time. And we never thought, oh, we're going to be looking back and remembering these songs. I mean, we might have thought that in a way, but we couldn't have imagined that it would be what it is today to people, right? Because it was always new. It was never, we did pops of the past, they used to call them, so.
Right.
And things went in and out of fashion like at lightning speed, right? So.
Right. What's interesting is what you talked about before there were actually record stores. where they saw the market for just selling records. The furniture store and appliance stores was another one. You go in there, to look at an oven or a washing machine, and then they have a little section with the vinyl, the album.
You actually have to flip that around and realize that it was originally furniture.
Yeah.
And record companies had to fill the demand for people to play things on this newfangled furniture they had. So it actually originally was furniture.
Isn't that
and
something?
and that the expression April flowers bring May showers. April showers bring May flowers, right? But it's actually the reverse. It's the flowers are changing the atmosphere, which is causing the water to fall. I found that out reading the New York Times science section. It's pretty interesting. Anyway, never mind all that. Okay. I hope you're going to be able to edit my various digressions. So there you go.
No, that's perfectly okay. I enjoy those, and I know people watching these do too. So that's all right. You get little history lessons and little anecdotes along the way, which is always
true enough.
Yeah. Well, how about your family background? Do you come from a musical family?
Yes and no, in a sense. My dad was a writer, but he was that breed of individual that they used to call a dedicated amateur.
Okay.
People, and they used to exist. You didn't have people who played sort of okay thinking that they were going to become professionals. You had people who just played music for the damn enjoyment of it. Yeah. So he taught himself various things over the years, and he was a music critic as well. So it came out in his writing as well. And he was very, very musical himself, which was a great thing. And and I've made this remark before, but he could never decide who was the greatest genius, whether it was Mozart or Fats Waller. So I was raised in a house where both of those people were revered. And because the LP era had started just previously, RCA Victor released all their Fats Waller stuff on a series of long playing records, right? Before they had only been 78s, all the Bluebird stuff that he did. And so my dad, we had 4 or 5 of those, and I've bought quite a number since, because he's been a big influence on me. Fats Waller has, Mozart too, indirectly.
Yeah, well, 2 extremes there. Yeah, but
he just responded to their musicality.
Yeah. Right.
It wasn't genre based. It was their musicality, and I think melodic feeling that Mozart was just melodies everywhere, and same with Fats Waller. Like his solos were all melody, like all the time. It was amazing. So,
right. We'll talk about some bands, musicians that you were into, as a teenager.
Well, it's a bit of a list, really. No,
we got time. Yeah.
Okay. Well, really. Okay. Well, I grew up so exposed a lot to the radio. So, and as you know, in those days, popular music embraced a wide variety of things. So I'll give you an example. The theme from A Summer Place by Percy Faith.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, gorgeous. When I was 10, I hated that record. I didn't want to hear those soft strings. I wanted to hear Elvis. I wanted to hear drumming loud and shit like that, right? So I love that stuff. I loved a lot of classical music, just because I was exposed to a lot. And here's another thing that we have to remember is that in the public sphere, in the public space, you were exposed to a wide variety of music, so that the population as a whole was, I shouldn't use the term more musically literate, but musically literate in a wider way that they are now. If you're 10 years old, like I was 10 and didn't want to listen to Percy Faith, if I had the internet now, I could live in a world where I never would have to hear Percy Faith. But now at my age, whenever I hear Theme from a Summer Place and I hear it, I go, oh man, what a great arrangement, and what a beautiful melody and stuff. In fact, I flipped it over into reggae one time as an instrumental because it works beautifully, So, but if you want it was more soaked into the culture. So, that folk music boom that they had was because the music was so soaked into the culture that it spilled out from everywhere, right? And now it's a different vibe now. Anyway, so I was into that class. I liked My Fair Lady and those kinds of things, and I loved Beyond the Fringe and the Flanders and Swans, so that English humor. So I had that English music hall, just humor, that style of humor coming in. But I loved all those rock and roll songs. So I think before the Beatles, there was, and everybody has there's this myth, okay, and you read these rock histories, right, and there's a myth, and it goes, oh, rock and roll was real, Elvis went in the army, everything was awful, the Beatles came along and revolutionized everything, it was all great. Okay, that's that storyline, you've read it a million times, right? So, and it's not total bullshit, because when you're talking about history, you have to outline big arcs. I understand that. But the fact is, there was a ton of music made between 1962 and when the Beatles broke through, that was fantastically exciting. I'm thinking of all those songs like Gary U.S. Bonds or the Orlons or the Dixie Cups with Iko Iko. I mean, there was just some great fucking tracks with great musicians playing on them.
Right.
We did have a lot of bobbies and all that kind of stuff.
Right. And the Beatles didn't operate in a vacuum either. I mean, where did they get their influences from here?
From all that stuff, show tunes and all of that stuff. Right. I read an interview with Paul McCartney. He didn't even know Till There Was You was in a musical when they learned it and did it, because he heard it on a record, like a Peggy Lee record, like she did it on a record, right? So that kind of exposure. Anyway, and the Beatle thing, I think it's hard for people to understand how much they turned the paradigm of the music industry around in so many really quite fundamental ways. It's hard for people to know, but anyway, they did. So I actually, speaking of that store, excuse me, Lofquist in Oakville, that's the first time I heard a Beatles song. And it's because I was a Del Shannon fan, and I bought every Del Shannon single there was, and he recorded For Me to You. And that was early 1963, so before there were any records here. And so I actually knew that song from before when the Beatles came through. But I was at Janet Palmer's 14th birthday party. So December 1963, right? And we're standing in one side, all the guys, we're 14. All the guys are standing on one side of the room, and the girls are all standing on the other side of the room. And they're all looking at this record, right? All the girls are like absorbed, like this, right? And we're all on the other side. What the fuck's going on over there, right? Anyway, that was the Beatles story,
Yeah, one of the most awkward social situations you'll ever find. Young kids like that. Girls and boys in the same room.
Well, the hair came down up.
Right. Well, what was the first musical instrument that you learned to play?
I always liked singing, but I had I took piano lessons for a year when I was small, but I was so pig-headed. I made a deal with my parents that I wanted to play baseball or do anything but that. So, and then years later, my mom said, you were right. She was not a good teacher. Like something about inside me said, I don't want to be with this woman, blah, blah, blah. So I didn't really, so I came to we moved back to Toronto, and I came to a school downtown here, and they had a band program that was just getting going. They'd had a strings program, but they were just starting out the band program, and they had this guy, probably 26 or 27 or something, teaching. He'd just come to the school to do it, and he was one of those charismatic, great individuals, right? I've run into what teachers are like. You have a few that were outstandingly horrible and a few that were outstandingly brilliant, and the rest of them were kind of okay people, whatever. But he was brilliant, and he somehow whipped this band program that was just starting, and by the time I was in grade 11, we were winning all kinds of competitions. So I started on the saxophone, then he switched me to the clarinet. So the wind instruments were really the first ones that I had any kind of training in at all.
Okay.
Right. So I started doing that, but I just taught myself to play the piano a bit and the guitar because of the Beatles and all. And I always wrote songs even when I was like 8 or 9 years old. And I had a hit parade of songs that I would move of mine up and down this hit parade. And I had this, and I suspect that many of the songs were copies of whatever was on the hit parade at the time. I know one of them was a copy of a Connie Francis song called Carolina Moon. I know it was called Beautiful Moon. I'm sure I ripped off Connie Francis on that one, but anyway, so I was always interested in that. So that's why I taught myself those other instruments. But I got quite good on the clarinet. And I went to university here. I got into the university here, but I have to say that I got into it by the skin of my teeth. So I was quite good on the clarinet, but there are levels,
Okay.
there are levels, and I got in by the skin of my teeth, and I got assigned to Capitol shortly after I got into the university program. So the greatest thing about that was I took composition this is my very first year, but I had composition classes with this Latvian composer named Kenins, Tezevald Kenins, and he really disliked me intensely. It was 1971. The university was basically European model. There was no jazz program then. There was no, yeah, I had long hair. He would send me back my assignments covered in red ink, right? But I learned something from him, right? And I did use that. I wrote all the string arrangements on the first album that I did, really based on that and the Hindemith traditional harmony book, which when I was away in Europe, I worked on. I worked my way through that in order to get into the university. I had to do a theory exam and stuff like that. So the Hindemith book was really good. I did all the exercises and worked my way through that. So, and that's why I was able to, but I learned from Kenins a bit and was able to write those which are really nice string arrangements, so.
They are. I'll get to that in just a little bit. I wanted to backtrack just a bit. Talk about Ginger Group. Was that your first band? Kind of, sort of.
Group, I think came after the Passing Fancy sojourn.
Okay.
Because the Passing Fancy thing was really only about 6 months or 8 months, because I joined the band.
Passing Fancy.
And then the management of the band fired the main songwriter guy, the guy who held the band together, the glue of the band. They fired him because he was like getting pissed off at what they were doing. They were a train wreck, right? So basically, suddenly I'm presented with, and then the whole band then quit. So they just replaced everybody, and we went and played the gigs that they had booked. They had gigs booked up so we went and played the summer gigs, and it was a nice little band, and mostly we went over well. And sometimes we ran into people who said, "Hey, where's Jay? Where's because they had fans, right? They had some really good records." So it was, but with those people that I played with, we had a great time. And there's Paul Saunders I still chat with, and he's great. And
flip-flop that and Ginger
What's
Group.
that?
I said I'll flip-flop that, and Ginger Group came to a Passing Fancy.
Yeah. And so anyway, when we finished all of that, and I went to Europe and blah blah blah, and I came back, and that's when I joined. The Ginger Group was already a group of 4, and I came in and played keyboard with that. And they another replacement keyboard player, right? They didn't have a keyboard player before, but it's like the Spinal Tap thing, where the drummers keep exploding.
Yeah.
No, I had a really nice Hohner Pianette. Do you know what that is? That's this little, the Youngbloods used one, and it's got a really distinctive sound. Al Cooper used one for a while, I think. But anyways, a little electric piano, and it's really nice piano that we had.
Get a nice sound out there. Well, I did want to mention off of from a Passing Fancy, off the single Your Trip. It didn't quite set the world alight, but DJ should have flipped it over and played your track, Island. I enjoyed that. That's a nice song.
Yeah, my
I
brother
think,
wrote that song.
oh, okay. Well, I look at the last name. I didn't see the initial before it, but I think that should have been the A side. That's a nice song.
You know
Island.
that that studio that we recorded in
Mhm.
was a 8-track studio, but they had 1-inch Ampex tape, so really nice sounding studio. And
Yeah.
they had a beautiful Hammond organ. They had a Celeste. It was a
Oh,
big room, so you could put a 30-piece band in that room.
uh,
And they also had a set of orchestral bells. So that's what's playing on that song. Dun, dun. I had this big set of
right.
orchestral bells, and I was playing them with these mallets. They sounded great.
It does sound great. Real good
Yeah,
production on that
yeah.
one. Yeah, that one. I think that song should have gotten pushed a little bit. It might have gone somewhere.
Uh, uh, there was no push. The guy, yeah, the guy who put that album out and recorded those songs was a guy who had a country and western label, and he's a rack jobber guy. So he'd make things and sell them, to places so they'd be up for $1.99, and whatever,
Yeah.
that style of business. He wasn't looking to go in the big end of the market. He wanted the little. He was always after the little corners of the market, right? So he didn't promote it at all.
Cut
I'll
out
tell
the
you another interesting thing if you want to know about the Passing Fancy album is
yeah,
their big
yeah,
hit was called "I'm Losing Tonight,"
right.
and it
Yeah.
has this screaming guitar solo at the front of it. It's a great record, right? And that was they're probably it was their biggest song, right? It was before I was in the band.
Yeah.
I used to follow that band around. Like I love that band; they were so good. But that screaming guitar solo was suggested to the lead guitar player by Robbie Robinson. He said,
Huh.
here's what you need to do. And he showed him those, like the Toronto guitar players in those days used to put banjo strings on the top 2 strings of their guitars so they could bend them like crazy really easily. Like they could do those incredible bends that Robbie Robertson could do. All the Toronto guitar players all played Fenders, So anyway, so Phil did this, but because they'd already done the track, they recorded it on a separate bit of tape and mixed it in on the
Okay.
fly. So when John Irvin got the tapes for the album, the piece was missing. They didn't have the piece with, so on the album it came out and it's just the rhythm track. There's no lead guitar on the album track version of that. Like
Is that right?
one of
Wow.
those accidents. But
Yeah, that's a
people have
new.
put it up on YouTube since with the off of this taking it off the 45. It's got a great guitar thing in it. Anyway, that's and
Right.
also when the CD first came out, when they reissued it, Pacemaker, I don't know who has the rights to it, but it was slow.
Uh,
Like it was the wrong speed. They mastered it at the wrong speed. And not just a tiny bit slow. It was really
real.
slow. It
Real.
was, it was ridiculous. Anyway,
Wow. Well, that's no. I like to hear things like that too. I didn't want to go into too much before
you
you were
asked me about the groups,
in the
the
band.
music that influenced me around the time of the Beatles, but I'd have to say that I love Jerry and the Pacemakers.
Oh
I
yeah.
liked all those British bands. We were just bathing in that
Yeah.
fucking music all the time. Spencer Davis Group and Kinks and the Hollies, and the Searchers, like how good is that? Animals.
I love the
Ah,
I love the strings on "Don't Let the Sun Catch You Crying." That's just a classic.
that's so nice. And Traffic.
Yeah,
I saw Traffic play in 1968 in Rotterdam in a high school gym. So there were like 150 people there, and it was the Island promotional tour. So it was Traffic and Free was opening up. So the summer of 1968, and All Right Now either had just come out or was about to come out. I think it was about to because it's the beginning of the summer. I think it came out towards the end of the summer. So they were coming up, and man, that was it was a 3-piece Traffic, without Dave Mason. So Winwood is like playing bass with his feet, and at one point he had his green Thunderbird strapped around his neck, and he was playing bass with his feet, and then he played these riffs on the guitar, and then he hit a step on his organ. Like it was like phenomenal, like it's so unbelievable. And sometimes the guy who played flute and sax would play bass pedals as well too. So yeah, I always remember that concert. And Free was unbelievable.
oh yeah, I've
I
heard so.
just like my jaw was dropping. So. I'll tell you another thing that happened on that same trip. is I went to Ronnie Scott's in London, the jazz club, to see Joe Pass. And
Oh,
I loved Hendrix, and I
yeah.
loved, you know, I love Clapton and Pete Townsend, lots of noise and all that shit. So there's Joe Pass, and I'm like 20 feet away from him playing nylon string guitar, like Clapton. And it was so fucking intense. It was
Oh,
so good that
yeah.
my mind was opened
Uh-huh.
because, I was 18. What do I know? I just associate kind of this excitement with volume and kind of showbiz stuff. And there's a guy just delivering that kind of excitement with just out of his fingers, right? That was a big lesson. Joe Pass, unbelievable.
Wow. Yeah.
We were blessed in Toronto because I'll tell you what it was like in the 60s and in mostly into the 70s is we had this Yorkville area, which was like the hippie area. So there was a lot of folk music and a lot of rock music and stuff going on there. But we had this whole bar strip on Yonge Street where there was a lot of rhythm and blues, a lot of jazz, a lot of stuff like that, plus a lot of rhythm and blues clubs. And because of the racial situation in the United States, a lot of black musicians came and played here. Like bands from Detroit would play Port Stanley and then Crystal Beach and then Hamilton, and they'd either go to Buffalo or they'd come and play Toronto and then Montreal, and then they'd go down to New York. It was like a circuit around there. And you could go at the Colonial Tavern and sit upstairs if you weren't of drinking age, which was 21 in those days, the way it is in a lot of American states now, even, I think. But you could go, and I saw Thelonious Monk and Roland Kirk, and it was just like, now people sometimes post the sort of entertainment page out of a newspaper from then, and people are like gobsmacked at well, these people are playing. Look over here, these people are playing. Like it was a richness here of music and a real blend of music, right? And they talk about, there's a Nashville sound, and they tried to promote the Boston sound and with the ultimate spinach. I don't know if you remember those days, but the Bosstown sound, but there actually really was kind of a Toronto sound, right? Centered around the B3 and that Fender guitar, like all those followers of Robbie. And there's another guitar player here named Freddie Keeler that was, I think, similarly influential among the guitar players here in town, so in Don Troiano. So there's a real, there was a Toronto sound. It's kind of, these things are hard to pinpoint, but that you could tell a Mersey beat record, like, right? Couldn't you for a while, just the drum beat and the sonics of the thing. And
Yeah.
and as usual, we were just imitating all the stuff that was going on elsewhere, and what was coming out was, we had this great band here called the Ugly Ducklings that were kind of like the Rolling Stones, but they were really, really good. And they had great songs. Like they were like Rolling Stones now, Rolling Stones, like really fantastic, really good. And they had some big local hits here. But it was one of the things that got the music scene going here, was because for years the radio stations wouldn't play any Canadian records. Oh, they're shitty. Their job was, like we had a real branch plant mentality here. The record companies, their job was to sell American records here and send the money back to the United States. That was it. But in the 60s, so many bands were popular enough to sell independently records that suddenly some of these companies started going, okay. And I'm not really dissing them. Like some of them were really good, actively looked for, once they realized there was something there, they actively looked for people and signed people, right? They, whatever but this scene developed literally out of kids wanting to buy those records. I got into a passing fancy because I used to hang around this store that their managers ran, but it was a bookstore, but they stocked a few 45s, Canadian 45s. And I used to buy my Canadian 45, my local bands that I loved, used to buy their 45s there. So that was, the Canadian business before was really small, and it still is small, compared to the
comparatively, yeah. Well, yeah, you took, influences and drew from, other bands, maybe American, R&B and what have you, soul, and then it made it your own, So the same thing with the English, they drew from America, and they had it
recycled that stuff. Yeah,
exactly. Their own too. So yeah,
because you can't really play it properly, so you just however you play it. people like it,
Right.
that's all good, you know.
Exactly. That's right. And somebody's going to like it. Well, what are your what's your memory of Goody Two Shoes?
Well, that's that fellow from Passing Fancy, Jay. I've got to say, he was maybe 2 years older than me. You know, it seemed like a big, you know, when you're 17, that's a bigger leap somehow than it would be now. But Jay and I were really close. He was one of those guys. He wrote all the songs for the band. When I joined the band, he taught me everything, the keyboard parts. He knew all the keyboard parts, right? He wrote most of the keyboard parts himself. So he taught me all the keyboard. I could hardly play, so he just taught me all those things. So we had this great relationship, and we stayed friends. And he lived on this the street. I eventually lived in that house too, but Kevin and Carol from Rough Trade lived in that same house. So and Jay was working as an assistant engineer at the studio, Sound Canada, that one I was talking about that had the 1-inch Ampex and everything. So Jay was working up there. It was owned by this guy named Art Snyder. And Art was a kind of entrepreneur. He had a number of record labels, and he would do the thing like he produced some songs that got on the charts up here and stuff like that. I've got a great story to tell you about one of them by this guy named Mark London. But anyway, so Jay was working at the studio, but Art used to have different projects. So he'd do like an album of country and western hits or whatever, and rack job it. You know, he'd get people to record. So he said to Jay and me, or to Jay, you can record an album and you can do 10 songs, and as long as 5 of them are on the charts right now, I don't care what you do. Okay. So we did Come Together and Up on Cripple Creek and a version of One by Harry Nilsson, and then we did some original songs as well. Yeah. Right. So, and literally it's the two of us playing on there, although Kevin, who's with Rough Trade, plays some guitar on there, and but I think it's just the two of us. And Jay played a lot of this. He played the drums on it. He was really just a talented dude, right? Wrote some great songs. So, and I have a lot of his songs in my head that even people from the band don't remember. Like he had this, there's an area in Toronto called Bay Street, which is like the business section, right? And he wrote a song called 925 Bay Street about a guy who works a 9 to 5 day at 925 Bay Street. It was like, so he wrote a song called My Family's Gone Away for the Weekend, about that teenage thing where there's a party at someone's house whose family has gone away, right? It was a great song. I related to that song. It was fantastic. So
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. So the Goody Two Shoes thing, it was never meant to be. He was putting it. He would sell it as, you know, go to these rack jobbers, and there's, you know, it's got some hits, current hits on it. It's 99 cents, one of those kind of albums, right? So, but the album sounds, there's some good tracks on it. It's fun.
Yeah. So kind of a one-off.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Definitely.
Jay made another album.
Okay.
That I had the tapes for a while, and called Perch, which had all these Canadian people on it of some of his songs, and it never came out though, but was anyway part of the legend.
The legend is there.
The legend.
Well, I wanted to go over the 3 albums from the 70s, your solo material. They're all quite good. I had never listened to them until, you know, doing research on this. But how did they go down when they came out? How well were they received? Or
do you know what the Canadian content regulations are?
No. What does that tell us?
I will tell you if you don't mind.
No, that's fine.
Because of that upsurge in popular Canadian groups, and Canadian groups are starting to sell, and Canadian radio still was reluctant to play it. Sometimes they would, but reluctant. The record companies and the publishers and some artists lobbied the Canadian government to put in regulations to force radio stations to play. So in 1970, I think, pretty sure it was 70, these regulations were introduced, and the radio stations had to play a certain percentage of Canadian music, and it was categorized whether it was made in Canada, written, produced in Canada, whatever. So there were these 4 categories. They had to apply. At least two of them had to be Canadian, had to be recorded here or by a Canadian or whatever. And the radio stations fought this kicking and screaming, but they were forced to do it. So at first, they would play the Canadian music between 12 midnight and 4 a.m. on Sunday morning. They'd ram all the Canadian content. Then their other tactic was to play only Canadian records that were big in the United States. So they'd play, Anne Murray later came on, but it's a bit before Anne Murray, but whatever, things like that. So, but those regulations led to the development of an industry. Because I was saying earlier on, we didn't have the structure here, right? It was a branch plant mentality. We didn't have managers. I mean, there were a few agents, but it wasn't an industry. It wasn't an industry yet. It wasn't able to support a lot of publicists or a lot of graphic artists or anything. There was some, but it wasn't an industry yet. And these regulations helped make an industry. Anyway, the reason I've told you all of this is because I was signed by Capitol Records in that first flush of them going, we have to have some Canadian artists. Where are they?
Where are they?
So I was signed along with a number of other people at the same time. Do you know Shirley Eckhardt? Do you know, she's passed away now, but she wrote something to talk about for Bonnie Raitt, and didn't write it for her, but Bonnie Raitt recorded. That was a big hit for Bonnie Raitt. I think the biggest hit. Let's give them something to talk about. And anyway, Shirley and I were signed to Capitol at the same time. She was like 15 at the time, right? So they had us all, we recorded albums, and I got really positive response to several of the tracks from the first album, and then I made a second album that was more like rock music, and that confused the hell out of everybody at Capitol. And I ended up getting dropped. I'll give you an example. I didn't have a manager. I was 21, didn't have a manager, and filled with stupid idealistic ideas about life or whatever. But I'm at the Capitol Christmas party, the same one where I got that 45, and I'm talking to the president. And he's saying, how's the new record, Fergus? And instead of saying, it's fantastic, you guys need to get behind this. This is fucking going to take the head off the music industry. Instead of saying that, I said, oh, I don't know, some of the tracks could have turned out a little better. And you understand where I'm going with all this.
Right.
I don't diss Capitol in any way. They had a lot of these new artists to promote. If you weren't on the promotion stream, I didn't have a manager, I didn't have a lawyer, I didn't know shit really, so anyway, that got good response, but I didn't sell very many records. I made it up on some of the charts with a couple of the songs. The second album had some songs on it that did pretty well. So then I got dropped by Capitol. So my brother and I did that third album, which came out on his label, which is a nice album too. He's just re-released that stuff on Spotify, the third album. He remastered it. So it sounds really nice. And we recorded it well, and we mastered it or mixed it with this guy named Bob Lifton at a studio called Regent Sound in New York. And at the time he was doing the sound for Saturday Night Live. But when I visited him, where we were there, he pulled out a billboard from like 1962 with all the songs that were recorded in his studio circled on it. There were like 30 of them scattered through the top 200, right? And he did Handyman by Jimmy Jones, is one of my favorite records. So he took me to Studio C, which was his original studio. He said, oh yeah, Jimmy stood over here, and that's the same organ we used on that track, right? Like, oh, okay, that's nice. Anyway, Bob Lifton was an amazing guy. He passed away in the 80s sometime, but he was a pretty well-known dude. Anyway, those records sounded great, and I'm glad Greg remastered them, because they sound, you can bring out some of the sonic stuff that was on the tape.
Originally, yeah. Well, I wanted to go through a few, like I told you before we started talking, and get your take, maybe some background info, or
sure.
see if or maybe some that you enjoyed off of All the Right Noises, Mirrors, really nice song. And then Laura, that's where I first noticed the orchestration, and that's a cello. I believe it's a cello.
Yeah, we just had a little section, a violin, a couple of violins, and a viola and a cello, so just a quartet really. But
Yeah. It
We
almost reminds,
double tracked them stealthily because according to the union, you couldn't pay them extra to double track it. Anyway, whatever.
at first I was like, does he have ELO backing him on this Electric Light Orchestra? It was like with that, especially that cello.
There's a quality to especially the stringed instruments that really it's I've heard some amazing string samples, don't get me wrong, but there's something that comes through with the sound of bow on string and somebody there grunting and breathing and whatever. It's different. But there are amazing string samples, and I'm sure I could be played stuff and I would be fooled. I know that because the technology is advanced from every year, but
My
those
favorite.
string sounds are great.
Yes, they are. I love the oboe. I mean, not particularly but I'm just saying the instrument in the sound that it gets.
You know who played the oboe? George Martin played the oboe.
Oh, is that
Quite a good
right?
oboist, and Mitch Miller.
Uh-huh.
Do you know who Mitch
Oh,
Miller is?
yes, yes.
He's
Uh-huh.
he's basically the guy who invented the job of producer
Yeah, yeah,
because nobody produced records before that
yeah.
because they didn't have the overdubbing technology, and he thought of bringing it up. But anyway, he was an oboist, and George Martin was an oboist.
Yeah.
That always struck me.
Those old albums, Sing Along with Mitch, and yeah, there's
Mhm.
a whole series up. Yeah.
He's responsible for Frank Sinatra singing that song to the dog, though.
Oh, is he? Well, my favorite, I think, off of your first one is Feeling Fine. Really, really
Oh,
solid.
that's nice. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I
it
really
was
like that.
written about my little baby brother.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Okay, okay.
he was born. I was 14 when I was 13, just about to be 14 when he was born. So I somehow had a real, I looked after him a lot when he was little and blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of what that song's about.
Okay, and then one final track, "Take Me Please," is another quality track off of that one.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah, I always like the strings on that,
Yes,
the
yes,
way they work. And
yes.
that I remember picking that song out of the piano we used to have in my parents' house. Just those chords, the way they move up.
Yes, yep.
Anyway.
Another. Well, let's move up to the next year, town of Fergus. Um, my favorite, I think, off of this one is "Ice on the Road."
Yeah, that's the one that's lasted over the years, and a lot of people still remember that song. Some people. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that one, and "I Cannot Answer."
I'll tell you what the Capitol promotion was like for Ice
Okay,
on the Road.
okay.
Here's what they did. They
Mhm.
sent out to all the radio stations with the single a little ice scraper. The
I,
kind
yeah,
of
yeah.
to get the ice, a little short little plastic ice scraper. Down to Fergus.
Uh-huh.
That's the kind of shit that was going on in Canadian promo at that time. Okay, we were a big time organization. Don't get us wrong. Some little country. We got ice scrapers.
Well, you can't turn down an ice cream. I mean, come
My
on.
dad kept his for years. He used it for years.
That's great.
Yeah, yeah.
Little ideas they have. You
All
know,
good. It's all
yeah,
good.
it's all good, right? Here with You is another one.
Yeah.
And,
That got
and
into a Canadian film. Uh,
yeah,
uh,
really.
yeah, it's called Falling Angels. It was based on quite a best-selling book by a woman named Barbara Gowdy,
Mhm.
uh, about a dysfunctional family, uh, whatever. But the director was a guy named Scott Smith, and I've been trying to track down Scott Smith for the past few years, and I can't really find anybody. People go, "Oh yeah, Scott Smith." I can't find anybody who knows him or if he's still around or anything. And if anybody knows out there, thank you.
Yeah,
But anyway, he bought the album in a junk store sometime in the 90s and fell in love with that track. And he said he used it as the whole template for the movie. Like how they have tracks they put in while they're filming and stuff before they have their final score. He used it in about 5 places, he said, in the movie. And it's in one of the scenes as well, too. So it's kind
yeah.
of interesting.
What's the name of the movie again?
It's called Falling Angels.
Okay. Wonder if you can view that on YouTube or somewhere.
I'm sure you can, Scott
Okay.
Smith. I'm pretty sure you can. Yeah. On YouTube, there's also a 15-second clip of me playing live in 1972 at Massey Hall here in Toronto. And it was
Okay.
part of this thing called the Canadian Music Junket. And what it was this was after the content legislation was introduced, and the record companies had all these artists, and they went, okay, what now?
Yeah.
And so they invited journalists and record people from a lot from the UK, from France, some from the States, not that many from the States, mostly from Europe, UK. And they put on concerts in Montreal and in Toronto. They had a folk night in Toronto and a rock night in Toronto. And I think they had a classic and a jazz night in Montreal. I think that's how they chauffeured these people around and whatever. So I played on the folk night, but I kind of shot myself in the foot because I played rock. I had the band by then, so we played this kind of rock set in the middle of all this kind of quiet folk. I don't know. It was just kind of a mismatch. It was another one of my blunders with Capital, I think. So another one of the maybe. See, that's the thing about the managers, right? Like a proper manager would have said, "Oh, he's not doing the folk stuff right now. You should put him on the rock night." But what do you know? There you go. But anyway, there's a 15-second clip. The band sounds great. So
Check that out if you can. And,
yeah, it's called All Right by Myself. It's that song, All Right by Myself, is on there. But, yeah.
Well, also two more songs off of the Town of Fergus. Ride Alone, really like. And then Tom Riley. I think Tom Riley is my second favorite.
Okay. Well, that is a poem. And I worked at a library. And so this would have been in the late 60s. And they had archives, of course, and one of the archives they had was a magazine called The Canadian, which came out 1880s to like 1910 or something, and in that was a poem called The Old Canoe.
Okay.
And it was anonymous, and I looked at it and I thought, whoa, this is so nice. So I took words and flipped them around and made it about a person and not a canoe, stuff like that. And yeah, and recorded it. And then I guess about 20 years afterwards, a buddy of mine who's said, "Oh, there's that poem's at the Canoe Museum in Peterborough. Like the original poem, The Old Canoe, is like in a plaque on the wall, and it had an author's name, which I can't remember now. But anyway, that's the story of that thing. It came out of a magazine in the 1890s. A beautiful poem about a canoe that was laying on the shore, beaten up and disused, right? So I kind of flipped everything around there.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a nice folk track too, I think, and I think a lot of people, if they had heard that, could cover. Has it been covered? Do you know by anybody
Not
else?
as far as I know, actually. No.
Yeah, not really nice track. Well, jumping up to head to Fergus songs. Did that album have a different title than Fergus songs?
He's calling it Lake Erie Days now.
Right. That's what
originally, when we planned the whole thing, I think we might have even still been with Capital. It was going to be called Lake Erie Days, and it had some connection to this poem I wrote about Lake Erie, and it was more like, and then it got changed and whittled down and moved around, and then he called it Fergus Songs, but now he's gone back to calling it Lake Erie Days now. So
that's what I
on
saw.
Spotify, it's under Lake Erie Days. And they took off the only cover that I did on, oh no, that was on the second album. I did a bird song cover.
Yes, the Gene Clark.
Okay, so you managed to hear that because it's not on the Spotify, like on the digital version that you put up. He took that cover off because I guess he didn't want to deal with the royalty situation. I saw Roger McGuinn play in a club in Toronto, the Riverboat, famous folk club here in the 70s, and he was playing with his 12-string and a little pig nose amplifier. They'd just come out, so it's 74 or something, right? And I went up to him afterwards and I said, "Oh, I just want to say I'm a big fan. I recorded one of your songs." He goes, "Oh, which one?" I said, "The World Turns All Around." And he goes, "Oh, that was one of Gene's." And then he turned around. He didn't say another word. He just turned around and walked away. Said, "Oh, that was one of Gene's." So I guess the emotions were still raw or something. I'm sure they mellowed by now. We do a thing up here called Birds, Birds, Birds.
Mhm.
in which there's 5 of us, and we do like we had to learn like 32 songs like there, and we've only got some of their repertoire. We got amazing songs, right? And we've just done it a couple of times here because it's all musicians from different bands. It's hard to get everybody together, but anyway, it's a ball. I love those songs. It was so great and so well written and blah blah blah. And when we did the second show, Tim, the guitar player, saw this. Somebody forwarded him this tweet, which was from David Crosby to Roger McGuinn saying, with an attachment showing this thing, and then should we care that was the message. Should we care? and someone underneath had posted the comment, it's probably just a bunch of hosers from Canada or something like that trying to make a few bucks. And I thought that perfectly describes us. It's a bunch of hosers from Canada trying to make a few bucks. Like this is absolutely bang on, you know. Anyway, should we care? Because they decided we weren't big time enough for them to care. I mean, we're earning the money, right? Like what they got performance royalties for all those original songs.
Yeah.
You know, 32 of them we had to learn.
Right. Should we care?
Short and sweet. And the Gene Clark songs are the best.
They are. I enjoy his After the Birds, his solo material too. I don't think he got enough credit for that.
He shot himself in the foot as I've used that expression on myself, but he did, but he didn't get enough credit. He was made beautiful music,
Right.
very soulful.
Right. Yeah, he went through that downward spiral with drugs.
He did.
That. Yeah. So. Yeah. Well, off of Fergus songs, I think my favorite track is "Open Your Eyes."
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's written about a real life experience. That one is.
Yeah.
Mostly my songs aren't, but that
Yeah.
is, and Mirrors, that other song you liked, is about staying up all night talking with Jay, actually.
Oh,
Jay
okay.
Telfer. Yeah, that's what that song's about, really. Just our friendship, the way it developed there, right? And Open Your Eyes is about when I went to the pop festival on the Isle of Wight. I went 2 years to that. The year that Bob Dylan, I have to tell you this, the year that Bob Dylan was playing, you know, and everybody was fucking excited about Bob Dylan, right? He's going to play in the evening with the Hawks. Everybody was like just over the top excited. And in the afternoon, about 2 o'clock, is Tom Paxton. Do you know the name?
Yes, I do. Oh, yeah.
Okay, many people do not. He's forgotten
Okay.
in many ways. Like people our age might remember him, but he wasn't even a big star even back then. But he was well known, with an acoustic guitar. 150,000 or 200,000 people there in England, where there's a great folk tradition, but not many people know who Tom Paxton is.
Yeah.
And I watch as he entrances that crowd by finger picking, telling story, like old time Greenwich Village style, telling stories, playing, but finger picking, like awesome finger picking. And I watched, first of all, some people at the front are paying attention, and then some more people are paying attention. And by the end of his set, he had that crowd who's waiting to hear Bob Dylan. He had that crowd just in the palm of his hand. It was an amazing display of musicality and just showmanship, right? Like he had that, those guys that can tell a story, but at the same time they're finger picking like unbelievable shit, like it's really good. It's really great. Anyway, that was that festival.
Well, do you know who Carolyn Hester is?
I do indeed.
Yeah, I chatted with her last weekend.
Oh wow.
So I'm going to be posting that. She's 86 years old.
Wow.
And still very active. I think she's still performing with her daughters. And I mean, she's very lucid. I mean, more than that. And just doesn't seem or act that age at all.
Well, those people, and when I say those people, I'm including Dylan and Tom Paxton and Dave Van Ronk and Ramblin' Jack Elliott and all those people. They knew a kind of history of the music that was deeper than anybody who's playing what's called folk music now. And I'm not dissing people for this, because whatever, you grow up in the environment you grow up in. But I mean, those people like Carolyn Hester has a knowledge of original styles and stuff Yeah,
right.
amazing.
Yeah. Well, the reason I did, you mentioned Dylan. He played his first session was on one of her albums.
Oh,
Did
really?
you?
Okay.
Yeah, you know
And
that?
did she play
Yeah.
dulcimer? Is that right? Did she,
Did she?
I'm sort of associating that sound with her, but
She played guitar. I know she played guitar.
okay. All right.
Not sure. But yeah,
Right.
Dylan was. She asked him. I mean, a young Dylan to play on his. He was very ambitious. Let's just say that for sure. He
For
was.
sure.
He was kind of hounding her a little bit.
Yeah.
Can I play with you? You want to play with me? So that's the only way to. A
He
lot
was
of the
in
artists
Bobby
got it.
V's band.
Yes, yes.
Nice.
So his first session was on one of her albums, which I thought was fascinating too.
Yeah.
Yeah, played the harmonica. So let's go to a couple of more. On It Goes. I wish it was
Well, I was
longer.
going to tell you, I'm just going to tell you
Okay.
that when I was at this pop festival, the Isle of Wight,
Uh-huh.
I met a young woman from the country somewhere, and she said, "Oh, I'm looking after this farm in Wales. You could come there if you like." So that's why I hitchhiked to this farm in the rain. And it was the Isle of Anglesey is an island at the north end of Wales. This is the northern tip of Wales, and this farm was at the northern tip of Anglesey. And it was the most incredible week I spent there in the just beautiful spot in the northern part of Wales. So that song's about walking across the bridge and pouring rain, and the Beaumaris Bridge is like really long. It's like a couple of kilometers long. It's like pouring fucking rain. Nobody.
No. But beautiful country. Yeah, you're right.
Oh my God. Yeah.
I've never been there, but I've seen, what I've seen in pictures. Yeah, yeah. Heavenly Days, another one.
Yeah.
And then Peaches. Peaches, yeah.
Well, I live on the Toronto Island very briefly, and across the gap, what they call the Eastern Gap, was this place that what they did was they took automobiles and ground them up, and you could hear the thing. It sounded like it was eating when it was active. And that's literally what they do. They grind them up and they ship them off to get recycled into other cars, like turned into other cars, one after the other. So that's what that song is about.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, see, I like the backstories. I like to hear that. And a lot of people don't know that. They don't know where the origin or where it comes from. So that's always good to hear. Moving ahead a little bit, what do you remember about the basics?
New wave times, and I'm in I'm in my late 20s, and I'm hearing all these 19-year-olds playing songs like and I'm going, I can play those songs. Like all those songs on the 45s that I bought, just like Romeo and Juliet by like songs like that, and revamping all those songs. So yeah, and I like the idea of playing. It's kind of like we had prog rock and disco, and sort of punk thing was beginning, and it's kind of like it was nice to get back to playing those, trying to recreate the atmosphere of what was happening in 1965, when people were going to those clubs, and it was just so exciting, it just had that vibe to it. So yeah, that was what that band was about. We had fun doing stuff. We played the Peter Gunn theme and stuff like that. We did some strange covers, Black Slacks. That song, I can't remember who did the original of that. That's from a long time ago. We did a cover of Pop Music by M, which was
yes. Oh, okay.
Talk about pop music.
Pop music.
That was a great record. When that came out, I went, "Whoa, that's a great record." And it's the same as like Gloria, like it's the same changes as Gloria or the last time, right? So it's the same vibe. You can play it like a rock song like that. Anyway,
yeah, you're about that. Well, when did you start getting into reggae music? When did you start? And in
because it's that first Wailers album that became commercially available in North America. I'd heard some bits and pieces up here because being Canada, we have more of a connection with Jamaica than maybe they would in the States a bit. So a few of their records were hits up here. There was one called Jamaican Ska that I remember from like when I was 12, and that was pretty big on the charts here. So, and I liked the, I liked Paul McCartney's bass playing, and I liked the prominent role that bass was starting to take in pop music. Like there's all this Motown records and the Beatle records and songs like Band of Gold by Frida Payne with that fucking amazing bass line, or I Want You Back with that amazing bass line, all that stuff. So I like the melodic quality of the bass parts, and well, the interesting nature of the bass parts and stuff. I really enjoyed that, and because I'm a sax player, I liked the horns, and because I love group singing, I love the group singing, right? So, and prog rock was lacking horn sections and lacking harmony. They would often have one fairly high-pitched singer. I mean, Queen obviously had harmony. People had harmonies, but it wasn't like, I like the Jamaican style, which was based on Curtis Mayfield and the Impressions and that sort of, vocal trio, vocal quartet, right? I always loved that style, right? So much. And I like the horn playing. So that's why I got into it. And then I lived in an area here in Toronto called the Kensington Market, which right behind my place, there were two record stores. One was run by a guy named Stranger Cole, who was had many big hit records in Jamaica in the late 50s, early 60s, in a sort of calypso style or early mento style, more folk style, whatever. And the other was run by a guy named Ronnie Bop. And Ronnie Bop was a session guitar player. He played on the Mother and Child reunion with Paul Simon. He was in amongst those session guys from Dynamics from the early 60s, those guys, right? And Ronnie Bop had a story here, and Stranger did, right beside each other, literally beside each other. One night, Briar Duckworth and I were walking in the neighborhood, and we found a garbage bag outside of Stranger Cole's, and it was filled with 45s that he was throwing out. There must have been 200 45s in there, many of them with nothing on the label, not even anything written on the label.
Wow.
And Blair and I took them all. It was amazing treasure trove to us, right?
They all played well. They all played.
Oh yeah, they were just thrown in a bag. He's just I'm getting rid of this shit. But it was a Jamaican similar, like you didn't hear records that were, like, let's go. We're moving forward here. We're not listening to the past. Now bands come up now and they have to compete not only with their peers, they got to compete with fucking the 50th anniversary of some obscure band, and here I am talking to you. Why don't we just get out of the way and let them make some music? Damn it.
Right. I'll tell you what I like about reggae music. Listening to it always brightens my mood. It's happy music, and you can't stay in a foul mood listening to reggae. You just can't.
Even if sometimes the lyrics are not happy lyrics.
Right. Even if they're
that's true about all pop songs, though, isn't it? I mean, sometimes music can make you feel good, even though the lyric is,
Yeah. Yeah. It's different with reggae, though. I think it's just that bouncy kind of rhythm with it and everything, and it's sunshine to me. It's just.
Oh, there you go. All I know is that it's a very absorbent music, in that it can take in any of the other musics of the world and make it its own,
Right. It's almost like the first world music, I would almost put it in that category, Well, talk about the story behind how you and Jo Jo Bennett met and started working together.
Well, because I was a sax player, I was doing some sessions and blah, blah, blah. And I got linked up with a little section, horn players, and we would back up Jamaican artists when they came to town, because the system then was like old jazz singers. They would have their repertoire, and they'd send the repertoire, and they'd hire the musicians, and everybody would know the common repertoire, if you know what I mean. Like everybody knew Body and Soul kind of thing. And just like this thing, they'd send up a thing saying, Hypocrite's Rhythm in G, or all these different things, and then they sing their songs over top of them. So I was in a section. We backed up a number of really great artists, fantastic artists. So we were doing this show, backing up George Faith and Cornell Campbell and Tony Tuff. And George Faith and Cornell Campbell both were kind of big, they were big stars in an older style. Like George Faith covered a lot of rhythm and blues songs. He was of that kind of genre. And Cornell Campbell was an earlier, really beautiful, high voice singer, had wonderful hits. And Tony Tuff was more like a modern guy. One of his songs was called More Dogs Than Bones. This is a description of the economic situation in Jamaica, more dogs than bones nowadays. Anyway, he had some really great songs, but he was a younger guy, was more like a rebel. I mean, you look at it now in retrospect, it doesn't look rebellious at all, but you know, it was like had a kind of vibe to him, right? Yeah. So we did a few shows, a little mini tour, back up these guys. But we're doing this show at a restaurant out on a street here called Queen Street. So a bit of a sketchy area of town, but Jamaican restaurant. And people were saying, oh, this guy Jo Jo's going to come and play tonight. You know, and nobody's seen him. He hasn't been playing. He's kind of retired. So he's a legend kind of guy. And I went, okay. So I come and I meet him and blah, blah, blah. And Tony Tuff's the opener of the 3 acts. So we start into Tony Tuff's set and it's really sounding great. And Joe's there, he's playing well. And then all of a sudden I look and Joe's not there. And then about 15 minutes later, the ETF, or the Emergency Task Force of the police, comes in and stops the show, turns on all the lights, and makes everybody go out one by one. Wow. As well, they searched them, and then afterwards they found a number of weapons on the floor. I mean, Toronto's a pretty calm place, and this is in the 80s, but you know, a little shit going on, you know. And Joe had an instinct, and this is a true thing that I can say about him all the way through all the time I've known him. He knew he just didn't want to be there, and he just took off. Okay. He got himself out of there. Everyone else had to wait for hours while the police searched everybody there. It took them out one by one. The crowd went out one by one, right? Yeah. That was it. So that's when I met Joe. Okay. And then there was a guy named Joe Isaacs, who's a drummer. And if you ever look up Joe Isaacs, he's what they call foundational. He's like on so many records, so many big hits from the 60s and 70s, invented a certain style of drumming. Like he's like heavy, but he's living in Toronto and he decides he wants to put together a band to play ska music, which at this point is like 15 years out of date. Okay. But it's still popular. So he wants to play ska music. And so he calls the band Sattalites, and he gets us as a horn section. Like instead of Scatalites, he calls it Sattalites. And he gets a horn section, and we're in the horn section. He puts together the whole band, and we're playing all the old Scatolite material. Yeah, all these old ska instrumentals. And but the thing is, he gets all these costumes made for us. So it's like the Earth, Wind, and Fire time when they had capes and sparkly stuff. We all had costumes with capes and these unbelievable things, right? This woman made these costumes, right? And that band played a few gigs. There's a few stories there, but whatever. Played a few gigs, but ultimately didn't stay together. But what happened is Jojo and I and 2 of the other horn players decided we would start a little music school. So the 4 of us started the music school, and the 2 other guys dropped out almost immediately. And Joe and I just kind of kept it going. We rented this little basement, and we had young kids came. And the Satellites started because we would take the students out as though it was like their recital. Instead of being in a living room with the parents attending, their recital was to go out and play the song that they learned, or the bass line that they learned, in front of an audience in like a local restaurant or something, right? So that's literally how the band started.
That was their homework. That was their homework. Yeah.
Yeah. So everybody would learn a song, and we go out there. Sometimes there'd be 12 or so students there, and everybody would do their song or whatever. They learned one little bass line or one drum pattern or something like that. So it was nice. It was really great. And yeah, it was.
How many of those early students continue to play with you?
Uh, Neville stayed and played with us for years, and a number of others at various times have played with us. I mean, it's a long time ago now, and not everybody stayed in the music thing, you know. Some people just came just because it was Jo Jo. He had a reputation already as, you know, like he was from the 60s. He was well known kind of guy. He was amazing performer, and yeah, great player for sure.
Yeah.
He loved Clifford Brown. You know who Clifford Brown is?
I've heard of it. Yes, I have.
Okay, so Clifford Brown's a trumpet player
Mm-hmm.
who died tragically in a car accident when he was maybe 26 or 27, but he was one of the brilliant, like around Miles Davis 50s time. He was brilliant trumpet player. And Joe told me that he was his idol
Oh, okay.
and the other kids at the school that Joe went to, because they knew he was the only one that wasn't on junk.
Okay.
He was known for being clean in a time when a lot of those top level guys, a lot of them, not everybody, but a lot of them were you know, on heroin and stuff. So anyway, Joe just played. You could play bebop like nobody's business. Like, yeah, you do all that stuff. They love the reggae. So.
Yeah. Well, you guys over the years gained quite a reputation for great live shows. Any that you can remember that are special?
You know, we had played at a nice club here called the Bamboo, so we played a lot of shows there, and it's hard to describe, but that place had a special vibe to it. You know, it's like you can't design. You can attempt to design that, but there's some combination of location, time, decor, age group. There's some magical, you know, clubs do it and people say, oh, let's do this again, and they can't do it again because so it was just one of those subtle kinds of things. It was just a brilliant place, and for its time, like it was at the time, it was just perfect. Everybody's more interested in hearing this, not only reggae but also Latin music and stuff, you know, like it's just an opening up time for music in Toronto. So that was great. And we played at Sunsplash in Jamaica one time on the international night, which was really nice.
Yeah.
And
you were the only Canadian band ever invited, right?
Yeah, I thought Messenger went down, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I can't really remember. But yeah, we were on what was called the international night. Actually, there was an awesome band from Mexico there. It was fucking unbelievable, and a band from Africa, and it was a really great night. But we were down there for the week and saw a lot of the other acts and everything. So we finished our set at Sunsplash, and I come out backstage, and this beautiful woman with a child comes up to me, and she says, I just want to see what kind of a white man sound like a black man. So I just want to see what kind of a white man sounds like a black man like that.
Yeah.
And I was being really Canadian. I went, oh, thank you. Oh gosh, oh, thank you very much. Kind of, you know, some stupidity. She walks away, and this guy says, do you know who that was? And I said, no. And he said, that was Cindy Breakspear. Now, Cindy Breakspear was Miss World in 1970, was Bob Marley's baby mother, as they say in Jamaica, had Stephen and Damian Marley and the other, I think three, but I think that was Damian that was with her then as a little, maybe 10-year-old or something like that. I don't know, 92. You know, we could date it back to when he was born. I'm not sure. I think it was Damian that was with her. But it was, yeah, it's a good compliment to get that she thought I was a good singer. So it was nice. It was nice.
Wow. Yeah, that would stay with that kind of comment will definitely stay with you. Well, how about in the U.S.? Any shows? Where all did you play in the U.S.?
You know, we played that festival down in California one time, which was kind of interesting, and played a few club dates down there. We never really came. We played a couple of times in New York, Sounds of Brazil, and a couple of other clubs there. You know, they were kind of attempts to see if we could, you know, we played a lot in Buffalo and Rochester, though. I actually was vocalist of the year in some Buffalo poll in the 90s. So we were very popular down there. And you being an American, I can say these words to you, but I think that a lot of it was first of all, our audiences were almost 100% white.
Okay.
And people were really marveling at these white people and black people playing together. I'm really actually not kidding. They were kind of surprised to see these white people and these black people playing together. Like, and we're stupid people from Canada, you know, we've got this shit going on, and we're going, okay,
Yeah.
you
What's
know,
the deal? Yeah.
what's the big deal? Exactly, right? So yeah, it's we've had some great gigs down there. We were, yeah, massive gigs down there. It was fun. The American audience loved us too. So, but I was always struck by the fact that even now, in 2023, there's a divide that you can feel, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure it exists here. I'm not, you know, maybe I'm not sensitive to everything, but it's not the same, right? I know it's not the same, and it's just, you can feel it.
It's gotten better over the years. It has gotten better, but it's still there. You're right. It's still there.
It's here too, and we're importing some of your country's neuroses up here, unfortunately, but we're right there. How could we not? I mean, we're, even though we're tied to Britain, we're right there. We you know, we take in, when I lived in France for a little while, please, no offense intended, but it was amazing how different it was to not have American news broadcast at you all the time. Like, you don't realize, living in Canada, we're just bathed in it. Obviously, I watch CNN, like news, you know, like we get it all. And there was, like I was talking about the records, there was always a feeling of, oh, we're not doing it as well as you know, we're kind of like the amateurs here, right? The Americans are the professionals at doing all this stuff, right? Like, there's always been a bit of that Canadian kind of, you know, who do you think you are, going down and wanting to be successful? But for years, and you know the number of Canadians that are successful in America, and for years, that's why they set up those regulations, because for years, the only way for a big talent to really break through was to go to the United States, you know, like Glenn Gould and Paul Anka.
Right.
Paul Anka's like the premier example of that. He went when he was 15 with his own song.
Yeah.
How did he do that? Like, I don't even know. No, the chutzpah that guy had, right?
Right. Well, thank goodness for, you know, groups like, you know, talking to Ronnie King, the Stampeders. I used to listen to AM radio and hear a lot of that stuff, you know, played everything. And as well as Guess Who.
I remember when the Stampeders came to Toronto and they rode horses up Yonge Street, up to the from City Hall up to the radio station, up to Chum. That was Mel Shaw was their manager, and he was a fountain of these kinds of ideas. Mel was one of the major movers for the Canadian content thing. So Stampeders were one of the prime beneficiaries of the Canadian content thing. They had records came out just when you could get a lot of play, and they had some international hits, as you know. And I sold Rich my 335 12 string that I bought from Adam Mitchell and the Poppers. So it's a legendary guitar, that one.
Oh yeah.
I sold it to Rich. I think Rich still has it. I'm pretty sure he still has it. So yeah.
Yeah. The Poppers, another fine group. Yeah.
You know, I bought it from Adam Mitchell. And they got them. When they were signed to, I think it was Epic in the States, went to the Gibson factory. They're all given these things. He was given this prototype, a beautiful guitar. Wouldn't stay in tune, but anyway. But he told me a story which I'll tell you. And they played at the Cafe Wa, you know, that famous club in New York in 1967. I think it was April or May, and they were, maybe it's June, they were opening up for a band from San Francisco. They opened up for the Jefferson Airplane, the hottest buzz band in the place. And they blew them off the fucking stage, because Canadian bands in those days were really rehearsed, and the Poppers had this incredible show with incense, and they wore costumes, and they all played drums at certain points. And Skip, the leader, was the Rudiments champion in Ontario. Like, it was an unbelievable show with lights, and the Airplane were, you you know, the album was just starting to break and they were awesome, but those guys were ragged compared to the Toronto bands, like ragged. I saw the Grateful Dead in those days and they were like I said, there's like 20 Canadian bands that I could name right now that could play better than these assholes. Anyway, but anyway, so they blew them off the stage and they got rave notices in the paper. And that's the reason they got signed to Epic. Right? Yeah. Flash forward spring 1968, and they're paying Cafe One, opening up for a band that's coming from England. But this time nobody knows who the band is. Yeah. And the night is filled with press and record people. Everybody's there, and they're wheeling in these huge fucking Marshall amplifiers. And they come out and they do their set with the incense and the beads and the drums and everything. And then these three guys come on in jeans and t-shirts, don't even talk to the audience. They're going to look at the audience and play so effing loud. And Adam said, I knew we were finished. And it was Cream. Right? Doing that's when they recorded, I think, I don't know, it was anyway, the first promotional trip to New York, I guess, whatever, but there was a dead secret. And yeah. It could have been a total secret though, because Cream already had some stuff out there. And I know they came to New York to record Disraeli Gears with Atlantic with Tom Dowd, and that was in that same spring. So that was probably the time. But anyway, I always remember this. Adam said, I knew we were finished. And they broke up like 4 months later. Yeah. Because they're like, that's how fast things changed. Right. Like they were instantly out of style. Yeah. And that doesn't happen in the same way now. You have the long tail. As I was saying, everybody's, there's these bands that sound like sort of early Led Zeppelin, and well, you can get any era of music you want reset through a new group of musicians. So
there's a lot of retro, what they call it, retro bands out there. Yeah, exactly. Just rehashing a lot of that is what I consider. Well, what in concert? Let me ask you, what were with the Sattalites? What were some of the, or what are some of the popular songs in concert? Did you get
a lot of, we did like Give Me Some Kind of Sign and Wild and a few of the songs that did well for us. And but we're always changing up stuff and doing different things. And you see, one of the elements about Jamaican music that I really liked was that pop music at that time, certainly, and now less so maybe, but pop music at that time was all about rejecting the past. It was all about doing new stuff. We don't want to copy what's been done before. We don't want to do what's done before. Whereas reggae is built on the past. It's a great respect for the tradition, for those original rhythms that came out of the 60s and everything. So a lot of live shows, we would just play some of those old rhythms and the crowd respond. It's less so now because it's not as much a common language, but for a while in the 80s and 90s, there were all these hits that everybody knew and they're built on the songs from the past. It wasn't a rejection of the older stuff in order to have the new stuff, which was what was going on in new wave and punk and that kind of stuff. It was a deliberate kind of, that old stuff is shit. We got other stuff to do here, right? Whereas now, as you know, there's a lot of retro stuff now, but I don't know that it's built on the past so much. It's more like museum pieces, which I guess is probably the way it should be, but who knows?
I did want to mention probably my favorite, because it's the original is one of my favorites of the Sattalites cover is Too Late to Turn Back Now. I think I just love the original Cornelius Brothers.
What a great record.
Yeah, isn't it?
And their follow-up. Do you remember the follow-up? You got to treat her like a lady. You got to treat her like, you got to try. It's a great record. That was and great bass line on both of those songs. Yeah. Like listen to that recording for that time, that bass line has really stood out. Really nice bass line, especially the second song. Yeah.
And that period in R&B and the songs that added strings, like that one, like 3 Degrees. Remember?
It's just ahead of those Philly soul records and everything where they had great string sections on them. It's just a bit earlier than that, but they were from Florida, I think.
Yes, they were. Yes, they were. How did you find out about JoJo's passing in 2021?
You know, I knew he was sick, so, you know, just, yeah, he was pretty ill.
Yeah. Well, you guys been together for so long, it's probably almost like a family member, losing a family.
Definitely was like a family member. That's right. That's right. Yeah, you know, you often hear people say that about bands, like a family, and it's very true. You form these bonds, and you know, you go through some experiences together, and yeah, family time, definitely.
Yeah. I bet you had a lot of fun recording Jazz Lovers Society Volume 2.
You know, I'm at the age I am, and instead of saying, "Oh, I love to record that song," I just decided I would do it. And during the pandemic time, and I got some wonderful musicians to play, and I wrote some nice arrangements for the stuff, and yeah, and I wrote some songs in the style as well. But I love playing those songs. They're so wonderful to play. They play themselves. That's the thing. They're so well written. It's like Beatles songs are like that, right? You know, you can just play them, and they have everything built in, all the dynamics, everything's all built into the way they're written, which is really lovely.
Yeah.
And I've got a lot of respect for those older songwriters, because for the lyricists especially, and I know we talked a little bit about lyrics, but one thing I noticed, there's no excess baggage anywhere. There's never a word that's put in there because they needed a rhyme, or they needed the rhythmic quality of that word. And so, and this will get me, you know, dissed in a few quarters, but that's my beef with Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen.
Okay.
And that is that Hallelujah,
Mhm.
try and think of a rhyme for Hallelujah.
Right.
And the
Right.
fact is, he couldn't do it.
Mhm.
And I think those older lyricists would have solved the problem. And here's what I think is the problem. Other people don't agree, but he has this magnificent song with these incredible themes, and he has to say, "Do ya?" and
Yeah.
"Through ya,"
Mhm.
because he didn't solve the problem of how to deal with the difficulty of rhyming Hallelujah.
Mhm.
And I maintain that those older lyricists, they would have worked that shit out.
They would have figured it out. Yeah.
Even the corniest, hokiest song from
Mhm.
back in those days, there's never any flab on it anywhere. It's very to the point. The advertisers say, "What's the key message?" Right? Those songs have no problem giving you the key message. I saw Freddie Cole play once, Nat King Cole's younger brother. He's like 14 younger than me. Sounds just like Nat Cole. He plays the piano. He's great. And he would finish every song by repeating the title of the song, you know. He'd get
Uh-huh.
to the end of it, and he'd turn and look at the eyes and go, "The second time around." Or, you know, "Look for the
Yeah.
silver lining." You know, like he'd finish off every song like that. It was beautiful. It was a really
Uh,
wonderful voice he had too, you know.
yeah. Yeah. What has been your fans' reaction to that Jazz Lovers album?
I, you know, I'm kind of blessed in a lot of ways, because I don't really get any negative feel. I'm not big enough for anyone to take any shots at me particularly, and everybody seems to like. You know, people have very eclectic tastes
Yeah.
if they're allowed to. You know, I know we're fed a steady stream of whatever, but you know, the positive and negative things going on with the internet. One of the things about the internet is you can find stuff, you know, so people do, younger people or whatever, regularly find things and go, "Oh, this is good. Whoa, this is, oh, whoa, this, it's amazing. Who is this?" Or Annie Ross, what? You know, like it's and I find people find me now, which is, you know, like everybody complains about streaming, but the fact is, unless we all manage to destroy ourselves in some fiery cataclysm, the stuff's around for a long time, right?
Posterity. Yeah. Yeah.
Before, as I was saying, 6 months ago, couldn't I go to the record store? I couldn't find the 45 that I was on the charts 6 months ago, right? Like, and
Mhm.
now it's blessing and a curse. You can, as I said, all these bands have to compete with everybody from before, you know, and all the stuff that was done before. So it's, you know, I I was sitting, my son was like 5 years old, playing in the background, and I started cussing out the computer, and he goes, "Daddy, I thought computers were a good thing." I went, yeah, they are. They are. Yes, they are. It was basically like that. So but you can't tell the tide not to come in.
Yeah, that's right.
We're
That's right.
here.
Well, we'll talk about your latest working with Lord Sassafras, a better tomorrow.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's a fun thing. There we
yeah.
go.
What's been the reaction?
He's like a Jamaican DJ kind of toaster guy. He has some famous catchphrases from the bad old days and stuff, but he wrote a pile of songs that were all like with choruses and bridges and verses and stuff, old style. And he wanted someone to sing them. So, and I'd done some session work for him before. And so we made this album. One of the songs I wrote some lyrics, like I wrote the song basically, but the rest of them are all his songs. They're nice songs. I
I
enjoyed
was
it.
I was going to say it's hard to believe that they're all original because they sound like covers. In a good way. You know what I'm saying? They
I
sound
do.
like.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you said he wrote them many years ago, so that's
No,
probably
these are all current ones. He just writes songs. He's just a
okay.
bloody
Okay.
machine. I don't know, like his health isn't the greatest right now.
Yeah.
And I think there's a bit of a bucket list aspect to this too, because he's just constantly coming up with stuff, right? Like, and I have this lady that I sing with, Hermina, is so beautiful, and she's a bit of a Christian lady, right? So she asked Sassafras to write her the filthiest song he could write her. So he wrote this song for her. I'm not even going to tell you what it is, but it's so filthy. And Sam was playing it for me. I said, "Is that Hermina singing that song?" And he said, "Yeah, she asked Sassafras to write it." So it's funny. It's it's direct, shall we say?
Yeah, direct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, better tomorrow. That just sounds like one of those old reggae songs. It really does. It's almost
Yeah,
like
well,
yeah,
that's the thing about Sam too, is we get the sound we get is kind of reminiscent of the older thing, and we're
yeah,
using, there's no programming on it. It's, just people playing music, real drums and shit, so
right.
it's
You
nice
get
that way.
other three tracks that I like: Shoulder to Lean On, Standing on My Own, and Freedom. Yeah,
Yeah, well, that's
yeah,
nice. That's
yeah.
nice.
And in fact, Freedom, I had to go back and I listened to Richie Havens, and I was like, this is not his song, and it's not, But at first I thought, is this a cover of Richie?
Well, you were right to think that,
Yeah,
because I didn't consciously think that, but I realized afterwards that, oh yeah, I'm kind of in, because when I did the demo and I was playing acoustic guitar, like giving it a really heavy
right,
strum, like that
right.
famous Woodstock where he's just fucking flailing away at that thing, right? And
Yeah, yeah,
and and so I realized in retrospect that, yeah, that's where I did take that. I took that from there for sure. Like, I went, oh, okay, well, that's all right. And I added my own little examination of what the thing means, right? So
yeah.
that yeah, that's a there's a song that I did with the Sattalites, um, the name of which is, it's called The Key. And there's a Toronto group here called the Mandala, famous Toronto group in the 60s. And they had this album with the song, and it starts out with the lead singer going, "You, me, all of us are looking for the key that can open the door to the world." And he hits this fucking stratospheric note up there. So I took that and I recycled it into a reggae song, right? Just that line. And
Uh-huh.
and then I realized that I took the melody from the song by Pink called "Let's Get This Party Started," with whatever. La da 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 da. I was always struck by that kind of one flat note that's like, I don't mean flat, I mean blue note, like that she sings in the middle of the context of the straight ahead harmony that they have going on there. It's a great little, gives that song a little twist, right? So anyway, I was just struck by, and these were unconscious. I didn't think about these things at all. I just wrote this song, and then I realized, oh fuck, I lifted that thing from the Mandala, but it's totally different. And I lifted that from Pink, but it's totally different. So, but it's those where there's all these scraps floating around, right? Because I literally, and wasn't actually kidding when I said I remember all the songs.
Yeah.
all of them from when from pre-age 40.
Mhm.
Any song I learned after 40, I usually have to refresh. But the
Mhm.
songs I learned when my son was born,
Yeah.
I was looking after him all the time. I just thought, okay, you know what, Fergie, you got to learn 3 songs a week. So that's when I learned all those jazz songs. I learned, just made it a point. I learned 3 of those songs every week. I could sing them in some form or another, some way or another. So the songs are amazing to sing. So good.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Good.
Well, I know a lot of artists have gone back and done that American songbook thing. So yeah, those are the songs that will last forever.
You know, I think I know younger people have had this experience too of hearing a song and then hearing the original of it and realizing, oh, that's a song from 30 years ago. Because there were a few songs on the charts when I was a kid that I didn't know were from 30 years earlier, like Blue Moon and stuff. I didn't know. I had no idea. I
Right.
Only Have Eyes for You. I didn't know that was an old song, So yeah,
Oh, I'm the same way.
they get
Yeah.
recycled and moved around and everything like that.
Yeah.
I
Unreal.
know.
All right. Well,
All right. Well, listen, you have a great day.
yeah,
Nice to
yeah.
meet you.
Nice to meet you, and I will send you a copy of this once I get it
I have to
edited.
tell you that we're putting out a new satellite single
Okay. Okay.
probably in January.
Okay.
But if you want, I can email you a copy of that. You might like to hear it. It's a pretty
Oh
fun
yeah, I sure
record
would.
thing.
Sure
Yeah,
would.
and you never know what will happen with all that stuff.
Yeah, that's Fergus.
You never
Well,
know.
again,
All right.
again,
Take care.
it's been